Today, we're going to be talking about deck building in One Piece. This is going to be an in-depth discussion on deck building, and I'm going to try and do my best to explain some more advanced techniques on how you can make a tournament level ready deck. So in this video, we have three main points. The first main point is asking why, then we have decision making and our ratios. So asking why. Why are we building X deck for X format? You should be asking yourself why before you add any cards to your deck list. I'd like to draw a comparison to the game Flesh and Blood. In Flesh and Blood, a lot of competitive players, when they're playing two heroes of the same class, will ask themselves, what is the value of one hero versus another? You know, why am I playing this hero versus why am I playing that hero? You know, what is the difference? And this is something you don't have to have a correct answer, but it is important to answer your own questions. Knowing the goal of your deck is more important than building a good deck. Fundamentally learning what you want your deck to accomplish is important. And it can also help you be less frustrated with the game. You know, if you're trying to build a fun deck, you know going in that your deck is not going to be very competitive, which means you shouldn't worry as much if you win or lose. Leader and color choice is really important here. Picking a color and a leader that is going to complement your playstyle is far more important than picking a leader based on statistics, right? Like if you are a control player to your core, you just do not gel well with aggro. Why would you play Zoro? Just because Zoro is the best deck or one of the best decks in the game right now doesn't mean that you can't do well with a control deck. This brings me into my next topic of decision making. What cards should go in my deck? Now this assumes that we're not net decking. There's nothing wrong with net decking, but for the purposes of this video, we're just going to avoid the topic of net decking. We're going to purely be looking at why should I pick X cards, you know, what is the fundamental thinking process of deck construction. A card with a purpose is more educational than one without. So if I put a card in my deck and I want to play it for X matchup, let's say I put in Buggy into my deck because I want to find events that I know I'm going to use against like Zoro, for example. Like I want to play Buggy and Fire Fist so that I can play Buggy, search out Fire Fist, and clear Zoro's board. That is a purpose. Now, whether or not that is correct for your deck is a different discussion, but the fact that you've made that decision, that is an important step in becoming a better deck builder. This is also where niche cards can come into play. You know, when you're building a tournament level deck, there's nothing wrong with just scouring the One Piece cards for hours trying to find the best, most optimal card that can go in your deck. It doesn't matter if no one's ever heard of it. It doesn't matter if everyone's heard of it. You should be playing the best 50, not the most popular 50. Metagame knowledge / prediction is crucial. In the next slide, we'll move on to how to analyze the meta. And this is very important when deck building. The last point is you can't answer everything. You don't want to spread yourself too thin. A deck might not have an answer to everything, and even if it does, answering everything might not always be correct. If you're playing a niche deck, you'd rather hone in on what your deck is good at rather than focus in covering up some of your weakness if it's going to hurt you more than help you. So here is a top 16 breakdown from one of the recent Orlando events. We had 6 Edward Newgates, 4 Laws, 2 Rob Lucci's, 1 Katakuri, 1 Zoro, 1 Kid, and 1 Kinemon. If we were to ignore the rest of the meta, this is the only deck list we've seen this meta, what conclusions would we come to? We can't really conclude that there is a best deck in the format because we only have one event, basically. Let's take Newgate for an example. Let's say right after the tournament, Newgate got 0 tops. Our data set would be kind of conflicting, and we would not be able to draw a proper conclusion on how good that deck is. Now, obviously, Newgate is very strong, and it tops everything, so we based on the other data, we know that Newgate is a very good deck that we have to look out for. Trafalgar Law is also a very strong deck. We see 2 Rob Lucci's, which is actually pretty high for a list. You know, we have 1 in 5th place and 1 in 13th place. So if we were to just look at this, we would think, oh, okay, so Rob Lucci is the 3rd list. Like, if you were just to look at the top 16 and go, oh, 6, 4, 2, so those are the best 3 decks in the meta. All right, I got to worry about those decks. That's not actually how we want to analyze a meta, because there can be good decks and the known decks, and knowing where your deck fits into the puzzle that is the meta is more important than just saying, oh, this deck has this many wins, this deck has this many wins, blah, 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 blah. You know, raw data is not as important as making meta calls, basically. We have 1 Katakuri, 1 Zoro, 1 Kid, 1 Kinemon. Zoro is also a very dominant deck. However, at this particular event, it only got 1 top. So if we were to draw a conclusion based on this data alone, we would assume that Zoro's only decent. And if we were to look at other events, we can conclude that that is not the case. Zoro is fantastic as a deck. So this is the process of meta analysis, is just looking at all of these data points and sort of figuring out, okay, this is, you know, this list is doing this, you know, these leaders are winning, these leaders are barely topping, these leaders are topping a lot. Sometimes this leader tops a lot, sometimes this leader doesn't top at all. I think Katakuri is a great example, where sometimes we see Katakuri lists, you know, let's see 3 or 4 in a top, and then other times we'll see 0. So it's really dependent on the tournament. It's really hard to, you know, deck building. It's more art than science, analyzing the meta. Small decisions can have a big impact. So this is Russell Lepar's 3rd place Luffy list, and I think that this is just the bread and butter of great deck building. So when we look at this list, we see that the leader is Red Luffy. Now, a lot of people would just immediately look at Red Luffy and just be like, oh, Red Luffy is worse Zoro. Why would I play Luffy? Well, the main reason, if you watch the deck profile that he did, was that red is a very good color, obviously. So, you know, he still wanted to be playing a red leader. However, in the Zoro mirror match, which is quite common because there are so many, you know, red leaders, there's not much he could do to outskill his opponent and win the game. You know, the Zoro mirror match oftentimes is just going to come down to, assuming the players are at the same skill level, it's just going to come down to like luck of the draw and, you know, who gets their curve down better. You know, these kinds of things are very hard for you to control. And also, you know, there are cards like Buggy, which both leaders cannot get rid of. They just kind of have to, like, you know, whoever KOs a Buggy with Marco first is just kind of ahead. Now, this is where suboptimal or niche leaders can actually be more beneficial, because we see Luffy is a strike leader, so Luffy can KO Buggy. Luffy has tools that Zoro doesn't have. For example, Nico Robin is a card that Luffy gets access to and has a really strong play pattern with. Choosing these kinds of things are really important. The other thing that I really love about this list is he has very specific decisions and reasons why each card is in the deck. So the first card that we want to look at is Tony Chopper. This card is great into the yellow matchup, which is generally, you know, Zoro, and specifically Zoro and Luffy, they do not quite do as well into Katakuri because it is harder to kill them fast enough before they get to 10-drop Big Mom. And once you're at 0 life, you know, if they just swing a 10-drop Big Mom at you, you die. But this gives us an out with the Tony Chopper to just set up blockers and Marco to not just die to Big Mom. Now, again, Katakuri is only, you know, it's a good deck, but it is only getting, you know, 1 to 2 tops per event, so we know that we don't need to devote that many sideboard slots, as it were, to it. 3 blockers should get us, hopefully 3 blockers is enough for how often we plan on seeing that deck. Another great example of good decision making is Fiery Doll, which is just a fantastic card into Whitebeard. We have a lot of great cards. This deck is also designed sort of to deal with Whitebeard. We have Frankie, which is a 4-drop 6k that can just help us. Whitebeard doesn't really have a direct answer to an opposing 4-drop 6k. And also we have Luffy for the Whitebeard mirror match. So if they set up a bunch of blockers, we can just swing in, play it out, swing in all of our Dawn attached to it, unblockable, and attempt to kill them. We also have Fiery Doll, which helps you really pressure Whitebeard by just swinging big with your Luffy. And then we have other cards like Red Hawk and Guard Point and Radical Beam, which help us into, big things like Whitebeard. It helps us into Big Mom, helps us against big giant 10 drops. So there's a lot of great decision making that he made here. I would really recommend you go watch his deck profile on it. I really like this deck. Next up, we're going to talk about ratios and to answer the question, how many of each card do I run? We have to look at some important points. While in decision-making process, it's important to consider the ratios of your deck. Important factors include counterpower, searchability, and consistency. If I have a card that doesn't counter, I can't search, and it's not a very consistent effect, I need to be super hard pressed to run a card like that. It's like, if I'm not running this card, I lose every game. That kind of thing. You really want to have cards that, will synergize with your deck and also can just make your deck flow more easily. Often, ratios are best discovered via playtesting. So, the first iteration of your deck might not have the perfect ratios, and that's fine. You can playtest, you can work out the kinks. And the other thing is that it is often more art than science. You can data and analyze your deck to the death, and while that might be correct sometimes, playing your deck and having it feel good when you're playing it can often be more powerful than the raw statistics of your deck and how likely you are to hit certain metrics, kind of thing. Now, this is not to say that we don't want to let our feelings, dictate ratios. For example, whiffing, like if you play a Nami and you whiff, that's a really bad feeling. It sucks. But that doesn't mean that we run 100% Straw Hat cards so that we never whiff with Nami, because there are just some cards that are so strong that are not searchable, like Makino, for example, that we don't care that we can't, search it 100% of the time, and then we might whiff sometimes, because that's just not how we want to build our decks. We don't want to build based on feelings to a fault, essentially. There's a fine balance, and that's, again, why I think it's more art than science. Now, let's go back to the great example that is Russell Lepar's third place Luffy deck. We can see that he's running 2 Otama, which is a little bit unusual, but we're really not trying to play Otama to the board ever, unless we are going to basically play Otama, Fire Fist, kill like a 6k and a 5k. If we're not doing that play sequence, then we don't need to play Otama. And if we're not playing Otama, we have enough 2k counters in the deck. We have other cards that are searchable. We see different types of ratios on cards, and they're not immediately like perfectly self-explanatory. For example, Robin is a 3-of in this deck, and it is probably the card that synergizes with what our deck wants to do the best. Playing something and then using Luffy's effect to give Robin the Rested Dawn is so much more powerful than in Zoro, just giving Robin 1000 power. Even though functionally it's the same amount of damage, you know, you're getting that Dawn effect, which means that Robin is able to swing 3000 or swing and KO that 3000 character, which can change the game. We also see cards like Izo. You know, Izo is in this deck as a searcher, but it's not another 4 of searcher because we have less Whitebeard pirates overall, and that is not quite part of our strategy. Another thing is, like, you know, that we mentioned Tony Chopper earlier. He's only running 2 because, again, you know, this is a card that doesn't counter, and also we only really need it against specifically the Katakuri matchup, as in the red mirror, it's probably just going to get blown up unless you're playing against like Whitebeard or something, because they don't usually run like Seaquake or anything like that. But, you know, in the Zoro or Luffy mirror match, you know, this Chopper is just going to die. So we're not super worried about seeing 4 of it. Same thing with Gordon. Gordon is a really strong card, and it can even be an attacker. However, we really only want, you know, 2 of them, because we really don't want to see it very often. You know, it sucks to draw out a life. You know, you really just want to do this for when you can Jet Pistol something or Fire Fist something or Marco something. Like, you're really only wanting to use this card with synergy, and because of that, we only want a limited amount of them. Moving on, we have this 5th place Crocodile list that I really like. There's a lot of intricate ratios. So we have, the thing that I want to point out is that they are running 2 Kaya and 2 Alvida. And this is actually something that I disagree with, which I think is important, is he's running 2 Kaya and 2 Alvida. I personally would probably just run 4 Kaya, but he clearly, in his decision-making process, was like, I value Alvida more than Kaya, and that's fine. It is fine to make a card or put in a card because you value it and other people don't. Another great thing I love about this list is we're playing Crocodile, and, you know, one of the main niches of Crocodile is that he's Baroque works compared to Doflamingo, who's just a 7 Warlords leader. That's the only type that really matters, really. Crocodile gets access to Miss All Sunday, which is a blocker that says, on KO, if your leader is Baroque works, add an event from your trash to your hand, which means that there is a niche to this deck. You know, there's a reason why we're running this deck. There's a reason why we've chosen this leader, and, you know, Miss All Sunday is part of it, and I really like that. Also, we have very powerful removal plays when we go into Mihawk and Dawn -4 to get rid of another character. That's a really strong play that this deck has that Doflamingo, the other good blue leader, does not have access to. The other interesting thing I like about this list is that he's clearly running the Impel Down package just because he wants to have a searchable engine in blue, and we really don't have that with the 7 Warlords. It's not really like a generic package you can just stick into any blue deck. It really only works with Doflamingo because you're playing them from the top. And so because of that, he's running Impel Down instead. And I think it's pretty smart. Overall, I hope that this video was helpful to anyone trying to, you know, get into competitive One Piece, and I hope that you enjoyed and learned something. Let me know if I should make more videos like this. Please go ahead and subscribe to me if you haven't already, and I appreciate you so much for watching this video.